There's a small zoo tucked inside a city park in eastern Japan. The kind of place that doesn't make the travel guides, doesn't draw the big weekend crowds. No elephants, no lions, just red pandas drifting through bamboo and a colony of 60 Japanese macaques living on a granite hillside the zoo has been tending since the late 80s. And honestly, you probably never would have heard of it. Except for one very small monkey and a stuffed animal that changed everything. That summer, the kind of heat that makes everything slow down and go quiet settled over eastern Japan for 11 straight days. And in the middle of it, on a concrete ledge on Monkey Mountain, a first-time mother gave birth to a tiny male infant weighing just over a pound. And then she turned her back on him. Now, before you get upset at her, here's the thing you need to understand. She wasn't cruel. Nothing was broken, but raising a baby macaque is a skill, and skills have to be learned by watching, and she had never been shown how. The knowledge just wasn't there. It happens sometimes with first-time mothers, especially under unusual stress. Her body had done its part. The rest of it, she simply didn't have. A young keeper named Kosuke Shikano was 24 years old, 2 years on the job, and he watched this play out over 36 hours before he understood what was happening. And then he made a decision that would end up mattering to a whole lot of people, though he had absolutely no way of knowing that yet. He was going to hand-raise this infant himself, twice a day, every day. 7 in the morning, 7 at night. No holidays off, no gaps in the schedule. He and his colleague Shunpei Miyakoshi, who was 34 and had just moved his family to a bigger apartment so his 3-year-old daughter would have her own room, split the feedings without ever formally agreeing to it. It just became the way things were. But before any of that could begin, Shikano had a problem. And it was a more important problem than it might sound. Macaque infants come into the world gripping, their hands close around fur within the first minutes of life. It's not just instinct toward comfort, it's more fundamental than that. It's the body building the muscles it will depend on forever. And this infant had nothing to grip. So Shikano went to the storage room and started trying things. A rolled towel. The infant let go. A stuffed penguin. The infant turned away. A giraffe. A folded blanket. A cloth ball from the back shelf. Nothing held. And then, on a low shelf near the wall, he found something a previous keeper had left behind. A stuffed orangutan, about 2 feet tall, rust-colored, with long arms that had small Velcro patches at the wrists so they could wrap around things. Shikano set it on the floor. The infant didn't look at Shikano. He didn't look at the light or the walls. He looked at the orangutan, and then he walked toward it with that unsteady, certain walk of a creature that knows what it needs, even if it has never seen it before. He pressed his face into its chest, and for the first time since he was born, he went quiet. Shikano sat on the floor of that storage room for a while after, not really doing anything. Just sitting there looking at this tiny animal holding a stuffed toy, thinking something he didn't quite have the words for yet. Over the following months, the infant they named Punch grew. His weight climbed steadily week by week. He learned to climb, to jump between platforms, to ride on the back of the stuffed orangutan the way he would have ridden on his mother, chest forward, arms and legs wrapped around the soft bulk of it, face turned out to watch the world. Every morning, Shikano heated the formula bottle by holding it between both palms instead of using the microwave. Because the heat from a machine and the heat from a body are not the same temperature, and Punch seemed to know the difference. On the days Shikano had off, Miyakoshi covered both feedings without being asked. On the days Miyakoshi had off, Shikano came in early and stayed late. They never discussed this. It just became the shape of things. Now, here's where it starts to get complicated. Before Punch was introduced to the mountain, he spent weeks in an enclosure right next to it, close enough to hear 60 macaques, to smell them, to watch them through reinforced glass. And he pressed his face against that glass constantly. But here's the thing about what he was watching. A macaque that grows up inside a troop absorbs everything without effort. The angle of a turned shoulder that means move away. The slow blink that means I am not a threat. Hundreds of tiny signals that add up to a full language. You learn it by being inside it. From birth, from a mother who already speaks it fluently. Punch was learning it through a window, and there is no way to fully learn a language through a window. The gate opened on a January morning. Punch stood at the threshold for 11 seconds, holding Oran Mama against his chest. Then he walked through. The 60 animals on the mountain did not stop what they were doing. They did not turn to look. To them, Punch wasn't a threat, wasn't an intruder. He was just unclear. And animals, not so different from people in this way, do not easily make room for unclear. He found this out almost immediately. He tried to approach a female with a young infant and got driven back with a single sharp lunge. He tried to settle near the upper feeding ledge and found himself slowly edged toward the outside until he was standing in the wind at the far corner. Every day brought new corrections, large and small. And every day Punch walked back to his corner, sat down, and held Oran Mama. Shikano stood outside the fence during all of this, 8 meters back, arms crossed, not moving toward the wire, not calling out, just watching. What surprised him was that Punch never stopped trying. Every morning he moved back toward the center of the mountain. Every time he got pushed out, he waited, and then moved back again. A 1-pound animal up against 60, and he just kept going. And then, on day 31, something happened that 11 million people would eventually watch on their phones. Punch was moving along the base of the granite hill when an adult female came around a ledge from the opposite direction. He did what he sometimes did when he met adult females. He stopped, and after a moment, he extended one arm toward her with Oran Mama in it. He had done this before with other animals. Nothing had ever come of it. What came of it this time took 4 seconds. The female grabbed him by the ankle and dragged him 2 meters across the concrete. Then she released him and walked on. Punch lay there for 4 seconds. Then he stood up. He picked up Oran Mama, which had fallen nearby. He walked, not ran, to his corner. He sat down. He held the stuffed animal against his chest. He made no sound. Someone in the crowd had filmed it. By the next morning, 11 million views. The zoo released a statement that was, technically, completely accurate. It explained macaque hierarchy, the nature of correction within a troop, the fact that no single animal had shown sustained aggression toward Punch. All true. But here's the thing. A statement can be accurate and still not touch the thing that has people stopped in their tracks. And what had people stopped was the image. A very small monkey sitting alone in a corner, holding a stuffed animal, while 60 others moved through their ordinary day all around him. Shikano read the statement on his phone in the parking lot before his shift. Then he went inside. The next morning, something shifted. An adult female named Onsing, not high-ranking, Nothing particularly remarkable about her. Walked over to where Punch was sitting. She sat down beside him. She didn't look at him directly. She looked past him, at the middle distance, like she had come to look at something specific in the air. And then she reached over and began to groom the back of his neck. Now, if you don't know what grooming means in macaque society, it is not about hygiene. It is the primary language of recognition. The gesture that says, "I have noticed you are here, and I am choosing to put my hands on you." Punch had been on this mountain for 32 days without anyone making that gesture toward him. He sat very still while it happened. 7 minutes passed. Neither of them made a sound. When Ansing finally stood and walked back toward the troop, Punch watched her go. He didn't follow. But for a long moment, he stayed looking in the direction she had gone, instead of turning straight back to his corner. Outside the fence, Chicano uncrossed his arms. 4 days later, a keeper introduced Punch to a macaque named Go-chan, who had been rescued from a performance facility when she was 2 years old. Nobody knew exactly what her early life had looked like, but she moved through the enclosure with the particular wariness of an animal that had learned, early, to always know where the exits were. She had been at this zoo for 3 years. She knew what it felt like to be tolerated in a place rather than wanted in it. The first time they sat together, they were about a foot apart. Orin Mama lay on the rock between them. Neither of them initiated contact. They both just looked out at the enclosure. 22 minutes passed in silence. And look, I know that doesn't sound like much, but here is what that silence actually was. There are kinds of company that don't require language and don't require touch. Company that works purely through the fact of another body in a shared space, through breath and proximity and the animal knowledge that something nearby is calm, and that its calm is offered without condition. Punch had spent 6 months giving that to Orin Mama. It was a completely different thing to receive it. When Go-chan stood to leave, she paused once and looked back at Punch. Not with any expression you could name. Just a pause. Then she walked away. Punch stayed where he was for a long time after, looking in the direction she had gone. Miyakoshi watched all of this from the observation post. He had been on his feet for 9 hours. He did not sit down until after Punch moved. Then came Moo, slightly older than Punch, orange-tinted fur that was unusual for a macaque, moving through the enclosure with a loose, unhurried energy that belonged to neither the center of the social action nor its edges. She started appearing near Punch's corner in late February. The pattern was always the same. She came close, sat briefly, left. Came close, sat, left. Close, sit, leave. Come back. She never pushed into his space. She never demanded anything. She just kept showing up, day after day, in the way of something that had decided to be present without requiring anything in return. If you have ever had someone in your life who just kept quietly showing up for you without making a big deal out of it, you already understand what Mo was doing. And then, one morning in early March, Mo sat down near Punch and for the first time didn't leave. She groomed her own arm methodically, not looking at him. Punch held Orin Mama and watched the far wall. After 17 minutes, he shifted position, moved about 6 inches closer to where Mo was sitting. Mo didn't react, just kept grooming her arm. Punch kept watching the far wall, but he had moved the 6 inches. He had chosen them. A few days later, Punch was moving along the upper ledge when an adult male came around the corner at speed. The contact lasted 3 seconds. Punch went into the pond. He swam to the bank immediately, climbed out, stood there dripping, then walked to his corner and picked up Oren Mama in a grip tighter than anything Miyakoshi had recorded since the very first week of January. Now here is something Miyakoshi had been quietly tracking this whole time. Hours per day that Punch spent in physical contact with Oren Mama during waking hours. In the first week on the mountain, that number was nearly 10 hours a day. By late February, it had come down to just over 4. After the pond, it climbed back up to nearly 7. He read these numbers aloud to Shikano at the end of each shift. Just the numbers. No commentary. Shikano listened and nodded and didn't say what he was thinking. But here's what happened 40 seconds after the pond incident. Mo showed up and sat down next to Punch. Go-chan arrived shortly after and sat on the other side. Neither of them touched Punch. Neither of them tried to engage him. They just sat there. Punch held Oren Mama and didn't look at either of them, and this is the part I want you to really sit with for a second. He had let Onsing groom him. He had learned to sit with Go-chan in a silence that actually meant something. He had moved 6 inches toward Mo of his own choosing. He had done all of that. And then something frightened him, and he went straight back to the thing that had no choice about staying. Mo had a choice. Go-chan had a choice. Oren Mama did not. That was the exact specific difference between what Punch had been building for 6 weeks and what he had been holding on to for 6 months before that. The keeper's log for that night recorded 3 lines and then simply noted Mo and Go-chan present at subject's resting location for 47 minutes post-incident. Subject made no affiliative contact. Subject did not leave. Miyakoshi read this to Shikano at the end of the shift. Standing in the hallway in their outdoor boots, neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Shikano said he would see him tomorrow and went to his car. And then came March 15th. A video went around. 23 seconds. Punch and Mo sitting side by side on a flat section of rock, grooming each other. Mo working through the fur behind Punch's left ear. Punch with his fingers moving in small circles across her shoulder. Oren Mama lying on the rock between them. No one holding it. People noticed that Mo's fur had that same orange warmth in the mid-March light, the same color as the stuffed animal lying beside them. They wrote about it everywhere, and honestly, it is worth noticing. But it is not the most important thing in that image. The most important thing is the space between Punch's right hand and Oren Mama's left arm. That gap on the flat rock. The space that Punch had decided, at some point when no one was watching, to simply leave open. Not forever, not as some big declaration. Just for now. Just enough. Shikano found out about the video from a text from Miyakoshi that said only the date and the words you should look. He watched it standing in his kitchen, in the blue-white light of his phone screen, at 9 in the evening. He watched it twice. Then he set his phone on the counter and stood there in the quiet for a while. The last week of March was not special. There was no single morning when Punch put Oren Mama down and didn't go back. There was no dramatic moment that announced itself. What there was the ordinary accumulation of days in which Punch moved through the enclosure in the loose exploratory way of a young macaque, beginning to understand where he fits. Grooming Mu. Sitting beside Go-chan. Learning the patterns of the place. By the last week of March, Miyakoshi's log recorded an average of 1 hour and 44 minutes of daily contact with Oren Mama, down from nearly 10. Over the course of 66 days, and on the afternoon of March 24th, A keeper who was not Shikano and not Miyakoshi completed a routine visual check and wrote a single line in her log. Punch and Mo observed sleeping in group cluster. Upper South Ledge. The Upper South Ledge. The warm center of 60 animals pressed together against the dropping temperature each evening. The place Punch had never been. For 66 days he had slept at the edge of the mountain, in his corner. She looked at the ledge. Punch was in the cluster. Not at its center, but no longer at its edge. Somewhere in the middle, in the warm, dense press of 60 animals settling into the night. Mo against his left side, and in his right hand, held loosely, the way you hold something when you are most of the way asleep and holding it more out of habit than anything else, was Oren Mama. Not the grip of the early weeks. Not the white-knuckle certainty of something held because nothing else was there. Just the easy, habitual closeness of something kept nearby because it had always been nearby, and because there is no particular reason to let go of something that has never once hurt you. She added one more line. Oren Mama present. Reduced grip tension. Normal sleeping posture. Then she finished her check and moved on. A journalist asked Shikano, toward the end of all of this, whether he thought Punch would ever stop needing it. Shikano was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the enclosure, where Punch was moving along the south wall with Mo close behind him. Oren Mama tucked loosely against his chest, the way it had been for months now. He said, I think there will be a day when he puts it down and forgets to go back. He said, I don't know when. And then he said, that's fine. That day doesn't have to be today. He was 24 years old and had been coming to this zoo every single morning for 8 months, and he said it without any sadness, in the plain voice of someone who had learned that the point of staying is not to be needed forever. It is evening on Monkey Mountain. The light comes in at a low angle across the granite, turning the stone from gray to gold. 60 macaques settle into their end-of-day arrangements, the ongoing negotiations over space and warmth that add up, in their total, to the texture of a life lived together. Near the Upper South Ledge, Punch sits with Mo against his left side. About 2 feet from his right hand, Oren Mama lies on its back. Its rust-colored fur has gone lighter at the shoulders and neck, worn thin at the places where small hands held on the longest. Its eyes are open, looking straight up at the darkening sky. No one is holding it tonight. Oren Mama did exactly what it was meant to do.